The whispers started the moment Josephine Kane walked into the general store with her swollen belly, no ring on her finger, and her head held high despite the shame they thought she should carry. Wickenburg, Arizona, in the spring of 1878, was a town that thrived on gossip more than the copper that brought most folks there in the first place. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets, and the judgment of the townspeople felt even hotter. Josephine had arrived 3 months earlier on the stagecoach from Prescott, wearing a simple calico dress and carrying a worn carpetbag that held everything she owned. She had rented a small room above the seamstress shop and taken in mending work, her skilled fingers creating beautiful stitches while her belly grew rounder with each passing week. The other women in town crossed to the opposite side of the street when they saw her coming. They pulled their children close and whispered behind gloved hands about the fallen woman who dared show her face in decent society. The men looked at her with a mixture of pity and something darker, assuming they knew her story without ever asking. Only old Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, and Father Miguel at the mission church treated her with any kindness, though even the priest suggested she might want to confess her sins. Josephine never told anyone the truth. How could she explain that she had loved Thomas with every fiber of her being? That he had promised to marry her, that they had spoken vows under the stars even if no preacher had blessed them. That he had been killed in a mining accident just 2 weeks after she discovered she was carrying his child. No one would believe that their love had been real and pure and true. They saw only an unmarried woman with a baby coming, and they had already written her story in their minds. She was selecting flour and beans at the general store on a Tuesday morning when she overheard Mrs. Harriet Sullivan speaking to the shopkeeper's wife. "That Kane woman has some nerve, Mrs. Sullivan said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Parading around town in her condition. Everyone knows what kind of woman finds herself in such a predicament. No decent man would have touched her unless she was loose with her favors." Josephine's hands trembled as she set down the sack of flour. The baby kicked inside her as if sensing her distress. She took a deep breath and turned to face the women, her green eyes blazing. "You do not know anything about me or my situation," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "This child was born of love, no matter what you choose to believe." Mrs. Sullivan's face flushed red. "Love? Is that what you call it? A respectable woman would have a husband and a wedding ring." "A respectable woman would not speak about matters she knows nothing about," Josephine replied, gathering her skirts and walking out of the store with as much dignity as she could muster, leaving her purchases behind. She made it halfway down the dusty main street before the tears came. She ducked into the narrow alley between the bank and the saloon, pressing her back against the sun-warmed adobe wall and letting herself cry. She was so tired of being strong, of holding her head high when all she wanted was for someone to believe her, to see that she had loved Thomas and he had loved her in return. "Madam, are you all right?" The voice was deep and gentle, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps further south. Josephine quickly wiped her eyes and looked up to find a man standing at the entrance to the alley. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of warm whiskey. He wore dusty trail clothes and a battered Stetson, and his weathered face showed concern rather than judgment. "I am fine," Josephine said, straightening her spine. "Just needed a moment out of the sun." The man studied her for a moment, then removed his hat. "Isaiah Oliver, madam. I just rode into town about an hour ago, looking for work at one of the ranches hereabouts." He paused, then added softly, "And I could not help but notice you left the store without your supplies. If you will allow me, I would be happy to go back and purchase them for you." Josephine shook her head quickly. "I could not ask you to do that. I do not even know you." "That is true," Isaiah said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But sometimes strangers are kinder than those who ought to know better. My mother raised me to help a lady in distress, and you look like you could use a friend." There was something in his eyes that made Josephine want to trust him. No pity, no judgment, just honest kindness. "Why would you want to help me? You must have heard the talk already." "This town is small and gossip travels fast." Isaiah shrugged. "I have been in town an hour, madam. I have heard nothing except where I might find work and a place to stable my horse. But even if I had heard talk, I learned a long time ago that gossip usually has little to do with truth. He settled his hat back on his head. Now, what do you say? Will you let me help you? Josephine hesitated, then nodded. She told him what she needed, and he disappeared into the general store while she waited in the shade. True to his word, he returned a few minutes later with her supplies bundled in his arms. Where are you staying? He asked. Above the seamstress shop just down the street, Josephine said, but I can carry them from here. I am already carrying them, Isaiah pointed out reasonably. Might as well finish the job. They walked together down the dusty street, and Josephine could feel eyes on them from every window and doorway. She knew this would only add fuel to the gossip fire, but she was too grateful for his help to care. When they reached the narrow staircase that led to her room, Isaiah set the supplies down carefully at the bottom step. Thank you, Josephine said softly. That was very kind of you, Mr. Oliver. Isaiah, he corrected, and it was no trouble at all, Miss Kane, Josephine Kane. She studied his face, looking for any sign that he had heard about her, but saw only open friendliness. Well, Miss Kane, I hope your day improves from here. He tipped his hat to her and started to walk away, then turned back. If you do not mind my asking, do you know which of the ranches around here might be hiring? I am a fair hand with cattle and horses, and I need steady work. The Triple Bar Ranch, about 5 miles west of town, Josephine said. I heard the owner, Mr. Garrett, mention he was looking for help. His wife brings me mending sometimes. Much obliged, Isaiah said. He tipped his hat again and walked toward the livery stable, his long stride eating up the distance. Josephine watched him go, something warm unfurling in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without expecting anything in return. She carried her supplies up the narrow stairs to her small room, her spirits lifted despite the encounter at the general store. That evening, as she sat by her window doing needlework in the fading light, she found herself thinking about Isaiah Oliver. There had been something solid and dependable about him, something that reminded her a little of Thomas, though they looked nothing alike. Thomas had been fair and slight, with quick laughter and dreams bigger than the sky. Isaiah seemed quieter, more grounded, like a deep well you could draw from and never find the bottom. She shook her head at her own fanciful thoughts. The man had simply been kind to her. That did not mean anything, and she had no business thinking about any man when she was about to have another man's child. Her baby was all that mattered now. The weeks passed, and Josephine saw Isaiah several times in town. He had gotten the job at the Triple Bar Ranch and came into Wickenburg every Saturday for supplies. He always tipped his hat to her and asked how she was doing, and sometimes he would carry packages for her or help her navigate the crowded boardwalk. The townspeople noticed, of course, and the gossip intensified. That cowboy does not know what he is getting himself into, she heard Mr. Peters say to his wife outside the church one Sunday. Probably thinks he can get easy favors from a woman like that. Josephine's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. She had grown a thick skin over the past months, though the words still hurt. She was 7 months along now, and the baby was active, constantly kicking and moving. She talked to her child in the quiet of her room, telling the baby about Thomas, about how much he had loved them both even if he had never gotten to meet them. One Saturday in early July, Isaiah found her struggling with a heavy basket of fabric that Mrs. Garrett had brought for her to work on. He took it from her hands without a word and carried it up to her room. This time when he set it down, he did not immediately leave. Miss Kane, he said, turning his hat in his hands, I hope you will forgive my forwardness, but I have heard some of the talk around town. The things people say about you, Josephine's back stiffened. If you came to warn me that you cannot be seen with me anymore, I understand. I would not want to damage your reputation. That is not what I came to say at all, Isaiah said quickly. He looked uncomfortable but determined. I came to say that I do not believe a word of it. You do not carry yourself like a woman who has anything to be ashamed of, and I have seen how hard you work, how you keep your dignity even when folks treat you poorly. That tells me more about your character than any gossip ever could. Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. You do not know what happened. You do not know my story. Then tell me, Isaiah said simply. If you want to, that is. I am a good listener. Josephine had not told anyone the full truth since she arrived in Wickenburg. The words came pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. She told him about Thomas, about how they had met in Prescott where she worked as a governess for a wealthy family, about how he had courted her properly, with flowers and poems and long walks, about how he had promised to marry her as soon as he saved enough money from his work in the silver mine, about the night under the stars when they had spoken their own vows, unable to wait any longer to express their love, about the joy when she discovered she was expecting, and Thomas's promise that they would make it official with a church wedding, about the cave-in that had killed him and 5 other men, burying their dreams along with their bodies. His family blamed me, she said, her voice breaking. They said I had tempted him, that I had trapped him with a baby. They wanted nothing to do with me or the child. The family I worked for dismissed me immediately when they learned of my condition. I had nowhere else to go, so I came here where no one knew me, hoping to make a fresh start. Isaiah listened to it all without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he reached out and gently took her hand. I believe you, he said quietly. Every word. Your child was born of love, Miss Kane. Anyone with eyes to see could tell that. Josephine broke down completely then, sobbing as she had not allowed herself to do since Thomas died. Isaiah awkwardly patted her shoulder, murmuring comforting words until she finally got control of herself. She pulled away, embarrassed by her outburst. I apologize, she said, wiping her eyes. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have been carrying a heavy burden alone, Isaiah said. Sometimes a person just needs to let it out. He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Kane, I know this is not my place, but those people downstairs, the ones who judge you, they do not matter. What matters is that you know the truth and that your child will know they were wanted and loved. After he left, Josephine sat for a long time thinking about his words. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she could build a life here after all. Maybe her child could grow up knowing love despite the circumstances of their birth. Isaiah started coming by more often after that. He would bring her fresh milk from the ranch or eggs or sometimes a bit of meat. He never stayed long, always respectful of her reputation, but his presence became a bright spot in her difficult days. They would talk about simple things, the weather, the ranch, the growth of the town. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his own parents to fever when he was 17, about drifting from ranch to ranch looking for a place that felt like home. Why Wickenburg? Josephine asked him one afternoon as he helped her hang laundry on the line behind the building. Isaiah shrugged. Got tired of Texas, I guess, wanted to see what Arizona had to offer. He glanced at her, then away. Seems like it might have a lot to offer if a man was willing to put down roots. Something in his tone made Josephine's heart skip, but she told herself not to read too much into it. Isaiah was simply being kind, nothing more. August brought brutal heat to the desert, and Josephine found herself growing more uncomfortable as her time drew near. The doctor in town, an older man named Dr. Harrison, had reluctantly agreed to attend her when the baby came, though he made it clear he disapproved of her situation. Mrs. Chen, the laundress, had promised to be there as well, having delivered many babies in her long life. One afternoon, when the heat was particularly oppressive, Josephine felt the first pain. She was alone in her room, working on a christening gown, ironically enough, when her belly tightened and a wave of cramping washed over her. She set down her needle and waited, counting the minutes until the next pain came. When it did, she knew it was time. She made her way down the stairs slowly, holding tight to the railing. Mrs. Bradley, the seamstress whose shop occupied the ground floor, looked up from her work with alarm. Miss Kane, are you all right? The baby is coming, Josephine said through gritted teeth. Could you please send someone for Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen? Mrs. Bradley's eyes widened. Despite her disapproval of Josephine's situation, she was not heartless. She called for her husband, who went running for the doctor and the laundress while Mrs. Bradley helped Josephine back up to her room. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Dr. Harrison arrived and examined her with clinical detachment, offering no words of comfort. Mrs. Chen came shortly after and took charge, her gentle hands and soothing voice providing the support the doctor did not. She wiped Josephine's forehead with cool cloths and murmured encouragement in a mixture of English and Cantonese. You are doing good, Mrs. Chen said. Strong girl, baby come soon. Night fell and still the baby did not come. The pains were intense now, coming one on top of another, and Josephine felt herself growing weak. She thought of Thomas, wishing desperately that he could be there to meet their child. She thought of her own mother, who had died when Josephine was young. She felt terribly alone despite Mrs. Chen's presence. Then she heard boots on the stairs and a familiar voice asking Mrs. Bradley what was happening. Isaiah. He had come to town and heard that Josephine was in labor. Mrs. Bradley tried to send him away, saying it was not proper for an unmarried man to be there, but Josephine heard his response clearly. "That lady up there has no one else. I am staying." Josephine felt tears slip down her cheeks. Even now, Isaiah was standing by her. Mrs. Chen went to the door and spoke quietly with him, then came back to Josephine's side. "Good man out there," she said with a knowing smile. "He wait for you." Those words gave Josephine strength. She bore down with renewed determination, and finally, as the first light of dawn touched the sky, her baby entered the world with a lusty cry. Dr. Harrison caught the infant and handed it to Mrs. Chen, who cleaned and wrapped the baby with practiced efficiency. "You have son, Mrs. Chen said, placing the squirming bundle in Josephine's arms. "Beautiful, healthy boy." Josephine looked down at her son through exhausted, joyful tears. He had a thick head of dark hair and Thomas's nose. He was perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama. Your papa loved you so much, even though he never got to meet you. We are going to be just fine, you and me." Dr. Harrison finished his work and left without a word of congratulation. Mrs. Chen stayed to make sure both mother and baby were settled, then gathered her things. "You rest now," she said. "Man still outside. I send him away." "No," Josephine said. "Please, could you send him in, just for a moment?" Mrs. Chen nodded and opened the door. A moment later, Isaiah stepped inside. He looked exhausted, his hat in his hands, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. But when he saw Josephine holding her baby, his face broke into a wide smile. "Congratulations, Miss Kane," he said softly. "Is everything all right? Are you both well?" "Come meet him," Josephine said. "If you want to." Isaiah approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might disturb them. He looked down at the baby with wonder. "He is beautiful," he said. "What will you call him?" "Thomas," Josephine said. "After his father, Thomas James Kane." Isaiah reached out a finger, and little Thomas wrapped his tiny hand around it with surprising strength. Something passed over Isaiah's face, an expression Josephine could not quite read. When he looked up at her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "He is going to be a strong boy," Isaiah said. "Lucky to have you for a mama." "Isaiah," Josephine said, "thank you for staying, for being here. It meant more than you know." "There is nowhere else I would rather have been," Isaiah said simply. He gently extracted his finger from the baby's grip. "You should rest now. I will come by tomorrow to see how you are doing, if that is all right." Josephine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion. Isaiah let himself out quietly, and she settled back against the pillows with her son in her arms. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. The next weeks were challenging as Josephine adjusted to caring for a newborn while trying to keep up with her mending work. Isaiah came by every day, bringing supplies, helping with heavy tasks, even rocking little Thomas when Josephine needed both hands for her sewing. The townspeople watched and whispered, their gossip taking on new dimensions. "That cowboy has attached himself to that woman and her bastard," Mrs. Sullivan said loudly at the general store. "Mark my words, he is not staying out of the goodness of his heart. He is getting something in return, you can be sure of that." Josephine heard the talk, and it made her stomach turn. She did not want Isaiah's reputation damaged because of his association with her. One evening, when he came by with fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, she tried to tell him he did not need to keep visiting. "People are talking," she said, not meeting his eyes. "They are saying terrible things about you, about us. I do not want to be the reason you are judged poorly in this town." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, watching little Thomas sleep in his cradle. Then he said, "Josephine, can I ask you something?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a little thrill through her. "Of course." "Do you want me to stop coming?" "No," she admitted. "I look forward to your visits. You are the only real friend I have here besides Mrs. Chen." "Then I am not stopping," Isaiah said firmly. "I do not give a damn what those people say, pardon my language. But they have been wrong about you from the start, and they are wrong about this too." "What is this?" Josephine asked softly. "What are we doing, Isaiah?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something deep and true in his eyes. "I am courting you, Josephine. If you will allow it, I know the timing is not ideal, I know you are still mourning Thomas, but I cannot help how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you, with both of you. That boy feels like mine even though he is not. And you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. "Isaiah, I have a baby, I have a scandalous past. You could have any decent woman in this territory." "I do not want any other woman," Isaiah said. "I want you. I want to give Thomas my name. I want to stand between you and all those people who judge you wrongly. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." He dropped to one knee beside her chair. "I'm not asking you to marry me right this moment. I know you need time. But I am asking if you will let me court you properly. Let me show you that what we could have is real." Tears streamed down Josephine's face. "I do not know if I can love again," she whispered. "Thomas was everything to me." "I am not asking you to forget him," Isaiah said gently. "He gave you that beautiful boy. He will always be a part of your life. But maybe your heart is big enough for both his memory and something new, something different but just as real." Josephine looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had believed her when no one else would, who had stayed by her side through scandal and gossip, who looked at her son with such tenderness it made her chest ache. Could she open her heart again? Could she let herself hope for happiness? "Yes," she whispered. "You may court me, Isaiah Oliver. But slowly, I need time." "I have all the time in the world," Isaiah said, standing and taking her hand. He pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "We will go at whatever pace you need." True to his word, Isaiah courted her with patience and respect. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, their bright blooms a splash of color in her simple room. He read to her in the evenings after Thomas was asleep, his deep voice soothing and pleasant. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content with holding her hand or sitting close beside her. Slowly, Josephine felt the ice around her heart begin to melt. She found herself looking forward to Isaiah's visits with an eagerness that had nothing to do with friendship, and everything to do with the flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her. She noticed things about him, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the gentle strength in his hands, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. Thomas thrived, growing chubby and happy. Isaiah spent hours with the baby and the child clearly adored him. When Thomas was 3 months old, he smiled for the first time, looking up at Isaiah with a toothless grin that made both adults laugh with delight. Isaiah looked at Josephine with such joy that she felt something crack open inside her, something she thought had died with Thomas in that mind collapse. "What is it?" Isaiah asked, seeing tears on her cheeks. "I am happy," Josephine said, surprised by the truth of it. "For the first time in so long, I am actually happy." Isaiah pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her while baby Thomas cooed between them. "You deserve happiness," he murmured into her hair. "You deserve everything good in this world." The people of Wickenburg watched the unlikely romance unfold with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Some, like Mrs. Sullivan, remained convinced that Josephine was a fallen woman leading a good man astray. But others began to soften their opinions as they saw the genuine affection between the couple. Mrs. Garrett, the ranch owner's wife, started openly defending Josephine, telling anyone who would listen that the girl was a hard worker and a devoted mother. "That cowboy of hers is besotted," Mrs. Garrett said at the church social one Sunday. "And I have never seen a man so natural with a baby that was not his own. If that is not love, I do not know what is." In October, when Thomas was 2 months old, Isaiah asked Josephine to come out to the ranch with him. He had gotten permission from Mr. Garrett to show her something. Josephine bundled up the baby and rode with Isaiah in the ranch wagon, enjoying the cool autumn air after the brutal summer heat. The Triple Bar Ranch was sprawling and prosperous, with good grazing land and a reliable water source. Isaiah drove the wagon past the main house to a small cabin set back among a stand of cottonwood trees. He helped Josephine down and led her inside. The cabin was simple but solidly built, with a main room that held a fireplace, a kitchen area, and space for a table and chairs. A bedroom was partitioned off at the back, and there was a small loft above. It was empty now, but Josephine could immediately see its potential. Mr. Garrett built this for his son, but the boy decided to go back east for college, Isaiah explained. It has been sitting empty for 2 years. I asked him if I could fix it up, and he said if I made the repairs myself, I could have it as part of my wages. Rent-free as long as I work for him. Josephine looked around the space, her heart beginning to race. Isaiah, what are you saying? He turned to face her, his hat in his hands again in that gesture she had come to find endearing. I am saying I want to make a home for us. For you and Thomas and me, if you will have me. I know we have only been courting for 2 months. I know you might not be ready, but Josephine, I love you. I love that boy like he is my own blood. I want to marry you and give you both my name and my protection. The town will still talk, Josephine said, though her resistance was weak. They will say I trapped you, that I am using you. Let them talk, Isaiah said fiercely. I am done caring what small-minded people think. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. I know you love Thomas. I know part of your heart will always belong to him, but is there room in there for me too? Can you love me even a little? Josephine realized with startling clarity that she already did. Somewhere between his first act of kindness and this moment, she had fallen in love with Isaiah Oliver. It was different from what she had felt for Thomas. Thomas had been young love, passionate and all-consuming. What she felt for Isaiah was deeper, steadier, like bedrock you could build a life on. I do love you, she whispered. I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it. The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He bent his head and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Josephine felt the last of her defenses crumble. She kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into that moment. Baby Thomas chose that moment to let out a squall, breaking them apart with sheepish laughter. Isaiah took the baby from Josephine's arms and bounced him gently. What do you say, little man? Should your mama marry me? Should I be your papa? Thomas gurgled and grabbed at Isaiah's nose, which they both took as approval. Josephine laughed through her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Oliver. They were married 3 weeks later in a quiet ceremony at the mission church. Father Miguel performed the service with genuine warmth, blessing their union and welcoming little Thomas into his new family. Mrs. Chen and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Mr. and Mrs. Garrett. A few other ranch hands attended, men who had come to respect Isaiah in his months working at the Triple Bar. The townspeople were shocked when they heard the news. Some remained convinced that Josephine had ensnared Isaiah through improper means. Others, seeing the obvious love between the couple, began to reconsider their harsh judgments. Mrs. Sullivan sniffed and said she would believe in their happiness when she saw it last, but even she could not deny the way Isaiah looked at his new wife. Josephine wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Chen had helped her make. Isaiah wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face during the ceremony. When Father Miguel pronounced them man and wife, Isaiah kissed her with such tenderness that even the priest looked away to give them privacy. After the ceremony, Mrs. Garrett hosted a small reception at the ranch house. It was nothing fancy, but there was food and music, and for a few hours, Josephine felt like a normal bride celebrating a joyous occasion. She danced with her new husband while Mrs. Chen held baby Thomas, feeling lighter than she had in a year. That night, Isaiah carried her over the threshold of their cabin. He had been working on it for weeks, and it was transformed. There was simple furniture, including a cradle he had built himself for Thomas. Curtains hung at the windows, and someone, probably Mrs. Garrett, had left wildflowers in a jar on the table. It was not much, but it was theirs. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Isaiah was a devoted husband and father, treating Thomas with the same love and care as if the boy shared his blood. He worked long days at the ranch, but he always came home eager to see his family. Josephine kept the cabin clean and cozy, continued taking in mending work for extra income, and slowly began to feel at peace with her new life. The townspeople slowly adjusted to the reality of the Oliver family. Some never fully accepted them, but others began to nod politely when they passed on the street. A few even offered grudging respect for the way Isaiah had stepped up to claim a child that was not his own. Winter came to the Arizona desert. bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Thomas grew and thrived, reaching for his papa with chubby hands whenever Isaiah came through the door. Josephine watched her son bond with her husband and felt her heart grow fuller each day. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire with Thomas asleep in his cradle, Isaiah pulled Josephine close and said, "I want you to know something. When people ask me about Thomas, about whether he is mine, I tell them yes, because he is mine, maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters." Josephine turned to look at him. "What do people say?" "Some ask if it bothers me raising another man's child," Isaiah admitted. "I tell them no. I tell them I am honored to raise the son of a man who clearly loved you well. Thomas is a living reminder of that love, and I am grateful to his father for giving him to us." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I am the lucky one," Isaiah said, kissing her forehead. "I was drifting, Josephine. Going from place to place with no real purpose. You and Thomas gave me a reason to put down roots. You gave me a family." As winter turned to spring, Josephine realized she was pregnant again. She told Isaiah one evening after Thomas was asleep, suddenly nervous about how he would react. Would he love this child more than Thomas because it was his own blood? Isaiah's reaction dispelled all her fears. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up and spun her around, then gently set her down with a worried look. "Did I hurt you, the baby?" Josephine laughed. "We are fine." "Both babies are fine." "Babies?" Isaiah repeated, his face split by a huge grin. "We are having a baby. Thomas is going to be a big brother." He dropped to his knees and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one, your papa already loves you. And your big brother is going to be so excited." Over the next months, as Josephine's belly swelled with their child, Isaiah continued to treat both children with equal love. He talked to the baby growing inside her and read stories to Thomas. He helped Josephine through the discomforts of pregnancy with patience and care. And he never once made her feel that this child was more important than the son he had claimed as his own. In October of 1879, exactly 1 year after they married, Josephine gave birth to twin boys. The delivery was easier this time, with Isaiah by her side and Dr. Harrison surprisingly attentive. Perhaps the doctor had softened his judgment, or perhaps he simply respected Isaiah enough to treat his wife better. Either way, Josephine was grateful. They named the twins Isaac and Ian, and they had their father's whiskey-colored eyes and their mother's dark hair. Thomas, now 14 months old, was fascinated by the tiny babies, patting them gently and trying to share his toys. Isaiah was overwhelmed with joy, holding his sons with tears streaming down his face. But Josephine noticed that he gave equal attention to Thomas, making sure the older boy did not feel left out. "You are the best big brother," Isaiah told Thomas. "These babies are lucky to have you to look after them." The cabin felt crowded now with 3 babies, but it was a happy crowding. There was always someone needing to be fed or changed or comforted, and Isaiah helped with everything. He would come in from a long day at the ranch and immediately take over with the children, giving Josephine a chance to rest. The people of Wickenburg could not help but notice the Oliver family. It was impossible to miss Isaiah playing with all 3 boys in front of the general store on Saturdays, or Josephine managing all 3 children with calm efficiency at church services. And it was impossible to miss the way Isaiah treated Thomas exactly the same as his biological sons. One Saturday, Mrs. Sullivan watched Isaiah helping Thomas take his first steps while the twins dozed in a double pram that Isaiah had built. The older woman stood watching for a long moment, then approached Josephine. "Mrs. Oliver," she said stiffly. Josephine braced herself for judgment or insult, but Mrs. Sullivan surprised her. "I owe you an apology," the older woman said. "I said terrible things about you. I believed the worst without knowing your story. But watching your family, watching the way your husband loves all 3 of those boys equally, I realize I was wrong. Your Thomas is clearly born of love, just as your twins are. I am sorry for my unkindness." Josephine was so shocked she could not speak for a moment. Finally, she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. That means more than you know." Mrs. Sullivan nodded and walked away, and Josephine felt another piece of the weight she had been carrying lift from her shoulders. Isaiah came over with Thomas in his arms, the toddler giggling with delight. "What did Mrs. Sullivan want?" to apologize, Josephine said, still marveling. I think we are finally being accepted, Isaiah. It is about time, Isaiah said, though he did not sound particularly bothered. But it does not really matter, does it? We have each other and our boys. That is all we need. He was right. Over the next year, as the boys grew, the Oliver family became a fixed and respected part of Wickenburg. Isaiah's reputation as a hard worker and devoted family man spread, and Mr. Garrett promoted him to foreman of the ranch. The increased wages allowed them to expand the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for the boys and a small room where Josephine could do her sewing work. Thomas grew into a bright, active child who clearly adored his papa and his little brothers. Isaiah taught him to ride when he was barely 3, setting him on a gentle mare and walking beside him with a hand on his back. The twins toddled after their big brother, trying to copy everything he did. On their second wedding anniversary, Isaiah gave Josephine a gift. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with their initials intertwined. Inside was a delicate gold locket. "Open it," Isaiah said softly. Josephine opened the locket and gasped. On one side was a tiny photograph of Isaiah holding all 3 boys. On the other side was a lock of hair that she recognized immediately as Thomas's. "I thought you should have something to remember where we started," Isaiah said. "Thomas gave you your first son. I want to honor that. I want little Thomas to grow up knowing that his first father loved him, even though I am blessed to be his papa now." Josephine threw her arms around Isaiah's neck, overwhelmed with love for this man who understood her so completely. "How are you so perfect?" she whispered. "I am far from perfect," Isaiah said with a laugh, "but I try to be worthy of you and our boys." As the years passed, the Oliver family grew and thrived. Thomas started school and proved to be a bright student. The twins were hellions, constantly getting into mischief but always together. Isaiah was promoted to manager of the Triple Bar Ranch, and he and Josephine saved enough money to buy a small piece of land of their own. In 1883, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Julia. She was the image of her mother, with green eyes and a stubborn chin. The boys doted on their baby sister, and Isaiah joked that he was outnumbered by all the love in his house. Thomas, now 5 years old, took his role as big brother seriously. He helped with Julia, sang to her when she cried, and proudly told everyone at school about his baby sister. He had no memory of a time before Isaiah was his papa, and Isaiah had never treated him as anything other than his beloved firstborn son. One evening when Thomas was 6, he came to Isaiah with a question. "Papa, Johnny at school says you are not my real father. He says my real father is dead." "Is that true?" Isaiah's heart clenched, but he kept his voice calm. He glanced at Josephine, who nodded encouragement, then sat down and pulled Thomas onto his lap. "Come here, son, let me tell you a story." He told Thomas about a man named Thomas, a brave man who had loved his mother very much. He told him about the mine accident that had taken that man before his son was born. He told him how he, Isaiah, had met Josephine and fallen in love with her and her baby boy. "Your first father gave you life," Isaiah said gently. "He gave you your name and your mama's brave heart. He loved you before you were even born, but he could not stay to be your papa, so I got to be the luckiest man in the world. I got to be your papa instead. You have 2 fathers, Thomas, one who gave you to your mama and one who gets to watch you grow up, and we both love you more than anything." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Do you love me the same as Isaac and Ian and Julia?" "Exactly the same," Isaiah said firmly. "You are my firstborn son. I have loved you from the moment I met you when you were just a tiny baby. You made me want to be a father. You made me want to be a better man." "I am glad you are my papa," Thomas said, hugging Isaiah tight. "You are the best papa in the whole world." Isaiah held his son close, meeting Josephine's eyes over the boy's head. She was crying, and so was he. They had weathered so much to get to this moment, this simple, perfect moment of a father and son affirming their love. Later that night, after all the children were asleep, Josephine and Isaiah sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the stars come out over the desert. "We did it," Josephine said softly. "We built a real family. We proved them all wrong." "You built a family," Isaiah corrected. "You loved that boy before anyone believed in you. You held your head high when the whole town judged you. I just got to be part of the story." "We are both part of the story," Josephine said, lacing her fingers through his. "We wrote it together." Isaiah pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the desert cooled around them. Inside, their 4 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Josephine's vows to Thomas under different circumstances so many years ago. The years continued to pass in a blur of happy moments and everyday challenges. The Oliver children grew strong and healthy. Thomas remained devoted to his siblings, always the protective older brother. The twins developed distinct personalities, Isaac serious and studious, Ian wild and adventurous. Julia grew into a spirited girl who had all her brothers wrapped around her little finger. In 1885, when Josephine discovered she was pregnant again, Isaiah joked that they would need to build a new house entirely. She gave birth to another daughter whom they named Jane. Then, 2 years later, came another son they named Jeremiah. The cabin had long since been expanded into a proper house, with bedrooms for all the children and a large common area where the family gathered in the evenings. Isaiah had done well at the ranch, and when Mr. Garrett died, his widow offered to sell the triple bar to Isaiah at a fair price. With some help from a bank loan, Isaiah became a ranch owner. The family's status in Wickenburg had completely transformed. The Oliver children were well respected, known for their hard work and close family bonds. Josephine was sought after for her sewing skills and her kind heart. Isaiah was considered one of the most successful ranchers in the territory, but success had not changed them. They remained humble and hardworking, grateful for the blessings they had fought so hard to achieve. Isaiah never forgot where they had started, and he made sure his children understood the value of kindness and withholding judgment. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like Isaiah, with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady nature. When he was 16, he came to his parents with a question that had been weighing on him. "I want to know more about my birth father," he said. "Not because I do not love you, Papa. You are my father in every way that matters, but I want to know where I came from, all of me." Isaiah and Josephine looked at each other, then Josephine nodded. "I think it is time we made a trip to Prescott," she said. They left the other children with Mrs. Chen, who still ran the laundry and had become a beloved honorary grandmother to the Oliver children. The 3 of them took the stage coach to Prescott, and Josephine led them to the cemetery where Thomas's father was buried. The grave was simple, with a wooden marker that had weathered over the years. Josephine knelt beside it and traced the letters of the name. "This is your namesake," she told young Thomas. "Thomas Henry Kane. He was 22 when he died, full of dreams and plans. He wanted to build us a house with a big porch. He wanted to teach his children to ride. He wanted to see the ocean someday." Young Thomas knelt beside his mother, laying a hand on the grave. "Tell me about him," he said. For the next hour, Josephine shared memories she had locked away for years. She told her son about his father's laugh, his love of poetry, his terrible singing voice. She told him about the night under the stars when they had pledged themselves to each other. She told him about Thomas's joy when he learned he was going to be a father. Isaiah stood back and let them have this moment. He had no jealousy, no resentment. This was part of his son's story, part of his wife's story. He was secure enough in their love to honor the past. When Josephine was done, young Thomas said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for loving him enough to fight for me when no one believed you." "You were worth fighting for," Josephine said, cupping his face. "You have always been worth it." Young Thomas turned to Isaiah. "And thank you, Papa, for claiming us when no one else would, for giving me your name and your love, for never making me feel like I was less than your other children." Isaiah stepped forward and pulled his son into a fierce hug. "You could never be less. You made me a father, Thomas. Everything good in my life started the day I met your mother carrying you inside her." They stood together in that cemetery, 3 people bound by love that transcended biology and scandal and judgment. Then they made their way back to the stagecoach, ready to return to the family waiting for them in Wickenburg. The years rolled on in a gentle rhythm of ranch work, family dinners, and watching children grow. Thomas married a schoolteacher named Emily when he was 22, and they built a house on the edge of the Oliver Ranch. The twins went into business together, opening a freight company that served the growing towns of Arizona. Julia trained as a nurse, driven to help people the way Mrs. Chen had helped her mother. Jane showed a talent for horses, working alongside her father on the ranch. Jeremiah, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he had time. In 1895, when Josephine was 38 and Isaiah 41, they became grandparents. Thomas and Emily had a son, and they named him Isaiah Thomas Oliver, honoring both the fathers who had shaped Thomas's life. Isaiah held his grandson with tears streaming down his face. 2 generations, he said to Josephine. We have built 2 generations of family from nothing but love and faith. 3 fathers, Josephine said softly. Thomas Kane, who gave us our firstborn. You, who claimed him and gave him your name. And now Thomas himself, starting the cycle again with his own son. They stood together in Thomas and Emily's parlor, surrounded by their children and their first grandchild, and marveled at the journey that had brought them there. From a young woman standing alone in a hostile town, pregnant and judged, to this moment of joy and abundance. That evening, as they drove the wagon back to their ranch, Isaiah said, "Do you ever think about those first days, when the whole town thought the worst of you?" "Sometimes," Josephine admitted, "but not with bitterness anymore. Those trials taught me who I was. They taught me to stand up for the truth even when no one believed me, and they brought me to you." "I saw you that first day," Isaiah said, "crying in that alley but still holding your head high. I saw your strength before I knew your story. I think I started falling in love with you right then." "You saved me," Josephine said. "Not by marrying me or giving Thomas your name, though that mattered. You saved me by believing me. By being the first person to look at me and see truth instead of scandal. You saved yourself," Isaiah countered. "I just got to be part of the story." Josephine leaned her head on her husband's shoulder as the wagon rolled through the desert night. The stars were the same stars that had witnessed her lowest moment and every triumph since. The land was the same land where she had once felt so alone, but everything had transformed because one man had chosen to see her with eyes of compassion instead of judgment. In 1898, they celebrated their 20-year wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All their children came, along with grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The guest list included many of the same people who had judged Josephine so harshly 20 years earlier, but time and the evidence of a strong marriage had softened most hearts. Mrs. Sullivan, now elderly and relying on a cane, sought out Josephine during the party. "I have said it before, but I will say it again," she said. "I was wrong about you, my dear. You have built something beautiful here. Your family is a testament to real love." "Thank you," Josephine said graciously. "We all make judgments sometimes. The important thing is being willing to change our minds when we see the truth." As the party wound down and the guests departed, the Oliver family gathered around a bonfire. The children, now adults themselves, shared stories and memories. Thomas stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said. "Mama, you fought for me before I even drew breath. You endured judgment and scorn to bring me into this world and give me a good life. Papa, you chose me. You did not have to, but you saw us and loved us and claimed us as your own. You taught me that family is not just about blood. It is about showing up every day and choosing to love. Thank you both for everything." There were tears and hugs and laughter as the night wore on. Isaiah held Josephine close and whispered, "We did good, didn't we?" "We did very good," Josephine agreed. The new century dawned with promise and change. Arizona was moving toward statehood, and the wild frontier days were gradually giving way to civilization. The Oliver Ranch continued to prosper, and the family grew as more grandchildren were born. In 1902, Josephine received a letter that surprised her. It was from Thomas Kane's brother, Marcus, whom she had not heard from in over 20 years. He wrote that he was dying and wanted to make amends before he passed. He apologized for the way the Kane family had treated her, acknowledging that his brother had truly loved her and would have married her if he had lived. He asked if he might meet his nephew before it was too late. Josephine discussed it with Isaiah and with young Thomas, now 24 years old. Thomas was curious about his blood family, and they decided to make the trip to Colorado where Marcus Kane lived. They arrived to find Marcus Kane in the final stages of consumption, confined to his bed but still sharp-minded. He wept when he met Thomas, seeing his dead brother in the young man's face. "You look just like him," Marcus said. "Same eyes, same way of standing. Thomas would have been so proud of you." Tell me about him, Thomas said, sitting beside the dying man's bed. Mama has told me stories, but I want to hear from someone who knew him his whole life. Marcus talked for hours, sharing memories of his brother's childhood, his dreams, his character. He spoke of Thomas Kane's kindness and his quick temper, his love of books and his fear of deep water. He painted a picture of a real man, flawed and human and full of life. He loved your mother desperately, Marcus said. I was wrong to doubt that. Our family was wrong to blame her. He wrote me letters about her, about how she was the best thing that ever happened to him. If he had known about you, he would have moved heaven and earth to take care of you both. I know, Thomas said gently, and another good man did move heaven and earth for us. This is my papa, Isaiah Oliver. Isaiah stepped forward and Marcus looked at him with something like gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for loving them, for giving my brother's son a good life. Thomas would be grateful too. Marcus Kane died 2 days later and Thomas served as a pallbearer at his funeral, honoring the uncle he had just met. It brought a sense of closure to a piece of his history that had always been incomplete. On the train ride back to Arizona, Thomas sat between his parents and said, I am glad we went. I needed to know that part of my story, but it does not change anything, Papa. You are my father. You are the one who raised me, who taught me everything important. Biology is just biology. Love is what makes a family. Isaiah gripped his son's shoulder, too moved to speak. Josephine took both their hands, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude for the family they had built together. The years continued their steady march forward. Isaiah and Josephine grew older gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included 6 children, 16 grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren as well. They never forgot where they started. Josephine often told her granddaughters about those hard early days, teaching them to be strong and to stand up for themselves. Isaiah taught his grandsons about integrity and the importance of seeing past surface judgments to the truth beneath. In 1915, on a cool spring evening, Isaiah and Josephine sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. They were in their late 50s now, still healthy and active, but aware that they had lived more years than they had left to live. Do you have any regrets? Isaiah asked, holding her hand. Josephine thought about it carefully. I regret that Thomas Kane never got to meet his son. I regret the years of judgment and hardship, but I cannot truly regret any of it because it led me to you. It led us to this life we built together. Same, Isaiah said. I regret that you had to suffer, but I cannot regret the outcome. You and our children, this family we created, this is everything I ever wanted. More than I dreamed possible when I was drifting from ranch to ranch with no purpose. We rescued each other, Josephine said. I think that is the truth of it. I needed someone to believe in me, and you needed someone to believe in. We gave each other purpose and love and family. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their entire journey. Inside the house, several of their grandchildren were staying for the weekend, their laughter and noise a sweet reminder of the legacy they had created. Tell me the story again, came a small voice. They looked down to find their youngest granddaughter, 5-year-old Rose, looking up at them with wide eyes. What story, sweetheart? Josephine asked. The story of how you and Grandpa fell in love, Rose said. How he saved you and Uncle Thomas. Josephine and Isaiah exchanged a smile. This story had become legend in their family, told and retold to each new generation. Josephine pulled Rose onto her lap and began. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who was going to have a baby. She had loved the baby's father very much, but he had died before the baby was born. The woman was alone in a town where no one believed that her baby was born of love. They thought terrible things about her, and she was very sad and scared. But then Grandpa came, Rose said, having heard this story before but never tiring of it. But then a cowboy came, Josephine confirmed, smiling at Isaiah. A kind cowboy who saw her crying in an alley and decided to help her, even though he did not know her. He believed her story when no one else would. He stood by her side when everyone else turned away, and slowly they fell in love. And he married you and became Uncle Thomas's papa, Rose said. That is right, Isaiah said, ruffling Rose's hair. I married your grandma and I became Thomas's papa and we built this whole big family, all because I happened to ride into Wickenburg on the right day and met the bravest woman I ever knew. Is it really a true story? Rose asked. Really real, Josephine confirmed, every word. And the lesson is that love is more powerful than judgment, and family is built on choice as much as blood, and you should never give up hope even when things seem impossible. Rose nodded seriously, absorbing this wisdom. Then she jumped off Josephine's lap and ran inside, probably to share the story with her siblings and cousins. Isaiah pulled Josephine close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "We made it," he said softly. "Against all odds, despite all the judgment and hardship, we made it to this moment. A family spanning generations, built on love and faith." "We made it," Josephine agreed, "and I would not change a single moment, even the hard ones. They made us who we are, they brought us here." They sat together as the desert night settled around them, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful together. Inside, their family laughed and played, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. And somewhere in the stars above, perhaps Thomas Kane looked down and smiled, grateful that the woman he had loved and the son he had never met had found such happiness with a good man who chose to claim them both. The years continued to bless the Oliver family with health and prosperity. Isaiah remained active on the ranch until he was well into his 60s, though he gradually turned over more responsibilities to his sons and grandsons. Josephine continued her sewing work, now creating christening gowns and wedding dresses for her grandchildren, each stitch a prayer of love. In 1920, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Thomas, now 42 himself, stood with his parents and said, "Everything good in my life traces back to 2 moments. The moment my birth father loved my mother enough to give me life, and the moment my papa chose to claim us both. I am the luckiest man alive to have been blessed by 2 fathers' love." There was not a dry eye in the room. The story of Josephine and Isaiah had become the foundation story of their family, a reminder that love could triumph over judgment, that family was built through choice and commitment, and that the truest measure of a parent was not biology but devotion. Isaiah and Josephine lived to see their family grow to include 23 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, an occasion marked by a party that seemed to include half of Arizona. The scandal of Josephine's arrival in Wickenburg had long since been forgotten, replaced by the legend of a love story that had endured for half a century. When Isaiah passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 78, he was mourned by a community that recognized him as a pillar of integrity and kindness. At his funeral, Thomas delivered the eulogy, speaking of the man who had chosen to be his father and had never once treated him as anything less than a beloved son. Josephine lived another 8 years, spending her final years surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who all carried forward the lessons she and Isaiah had taught them. She passed away in 1940 at the age of 83, holding the hand of her firstborn son. At her funeral, her children stood together and told the story one more time. The story of a woman who had been judged unfairly, who had held fast to the truth when no one believed her, who had raised her head high despite shame and scandal. The story of a cowboy who had seen past gossip to the truth, who had claimed a woman and her child when the whole town turned away, who had built a family on love rather than judgment. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, "Isaiah and Josephine Oliver, they chose love." And in the years that followed, their descendants carried forward their legacy, teaching each new generation the truth that Isaiah and Josephine had proved with their lives. That family is built through choice and commitment, that love is more powerful than judgment, and that the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when the whole world says you should not. The story of the woman no one believed and the cowboy who claimed them both became more than just a family legend. It became a reminder that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are, that love comes in many forms, and that the most profound families are built not just through blood but through the daily choice to show up, to care, and to claim each other as your own. Thomas Kane had given Josephine and her son the gift of life and love. Isaiah Oliver had given them the gift of his name, his protection, and a lifetime of devotion. Together, these two men, one who died young and one who lived long, had created a legacy that spanned generations and proved that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the world. And so the story ended not with scandal or shame, but with the triumph of a love that had overcome every obstacle, that had built a family spanning generations, and that had proved beyond any doubt that Josephine's child was indeed born of love, and that the cowboy who claimed them both had been blessed far beyond his deserving to be part of their story.